Judas Iscariot, one of the most controversial names in biblical history, carries the stigma of a traitor, the one who betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. However, the story of his death is shrouded in mystery and contradictions that still intrigue scholars and Christians around the world today. In today's video, we will explore the different versions of Judas's end, those recorded in the Gospels, in the book of Acts, and even in ancient texts that circulated during antiquity and the Middle Ages. After all, how did Judas die? Was he hanged? Did he fall headlong? Or did he swell until he burst? Before we dive deep into these three fascinating versions, subscribe to the channel, the B side of the Bible, and activate the bell so you don't miss any of the hidden mysteries of biblical stories. Get ready for a journey through ancient texts, historical contradictions, and a profound mystery that spans centuries. Stay until the end to uncover the surprising answers that connect these accounts in unexpected ways. Let's start with the best known and also the simplest version, the one found in the Gospel of Matthew. According to Matthew, Judas was consumed by remorse after seeing Jesus arrested and condemned. He decided to return the 30 pieces of silver to the priests in the temple, but his attempt at redemption was coldly and directly rejected. What is that to us? That's your responsibility. Desperate, Judas threw the coins on the temple floor and, in an act of self-destruction, hanged himself. The priests, on the other hand, could not place that cursed money in the temple treasury because it was blood money. So they decided to use the coins to buy a field, the potter's field, which would become the cemetery for foreigners. This field came to be known as the Field of Blood, a name which, according to Matthew, reflected the weight of Judas's betrayal. Historical context and reflection. The Field of Blood becomes an important point in Matthew's narrative, not just as a symbol of the price of betrayal, but also as a reflection of Judas's sacrifice and remorse. It was a burial ground for those without a place, just like Judas, who found himself excluded and without refuge. What's interesting here is the connection between the act of returning the coins and the ultimate fate of that money. Why would the priests, who were willing to pay for the betrayal, now not accept the value back? This moral paradox is part of the mystery surrounding the entire story of Judas. If Matthew's version is dramatic, the book of Acts is brutal and filled with visceral details. In the Acts account, we see a very different Judas. He does not return the coins to the priests. Instead, he uses the betrayal money to acquire a field, the same field that in Matthew was purchased by the priests. And it is in this field that Judas's death becomes a scene of horror. He reportedly fell headlong and burst open, spilling his intestines all over the ground. This description is enigmatic and raises several questions. How did Judas fall so violently? The Acts narrative mentions nothing about a significant height, leaving us to imagine whether this fall was an accidental stumble or something more symbolic. Peter, speaking to the disciples, adds that the event of Judas's death was so shocking that the place was called a Seldoma, meaning field of blood. Here, the name of the field takes on a new meaning, not related to the blood money, but to Judas's own blood that stained the soil. Analysis and reflection. The book of Acts presents an image of grotesque physical punishment for Judas. The description of his intestines spilling out seems like a visually impactful divine punishment, reminiscent of other biblical accounts where characters who defied God met tragic and disgraceful ends. Again, however, this raises questions. Why does the author of Acts portray Judas so differently from Matthew? Are we dealing with two independent traditions? Or is there an attempt to give new meaning to Judas's fate? If you thought Matthew and Acts were dramatic, wait until you hear the account from Papias of Hierapolis. Papias, a Christian writer from the early 2nd century, offers an account that seems straight out of a horror movie. He describes Judas in a way never seen in the canonical texts. According to Papias, Judas's body began to swell grotesquely after his betrayal, to the point that his head became larger than a cart. The shorter version says that Judas ended up being run over by a cart, scattering his intestines all over the ground. The longer version of Papias details that Judas suffered unbearably, with his body swelling and exuding a putrid odor until he finally died on his own property. This place, marked by tragedy, became so contaminated and foul that no one could approach it without covering their nose. Context in comparison with other deaths. The death of Judas, as described by Papias, resembles other biblical narratives and accounts from that time that describe the deaths of figures seen as villains, such as Antiochus IV, Herod, and Galerius. In all these cases, divine punishment is manifested through a physically repulsive death, a sign of divine judgment and repulsion. Papias creates a narrative that symbolizes a physical curse as a reflection of impiety. The swollen body and open sores represent sin manifesting physically, a metaphor for a decaying spiritual state. From the earliest centuries of Christianity, the differences between these versions generated debates. How could such distinct versions of Judas's death coexist? Authors like Apollinarius of Laodicea, St. Augustine, and St. Jerome tried to harmonize these accounts, suggesting, for example, that Judas might have attempted to hang himself and then later fallen, resulting in the grotesque death described in Acts. But this attempt to combine the accounts also faces its own challenges. The narrative of Judas hanging himself and then falling, bursting open, raises practical questions. How could he have fallen headlong from a hanging position? And why wouldn't the Gospels and Acts, if they were part of the same story, mention both aspects? The traditions and the transmission of the texts. An important factor in understanding these divergences is considering how the texts circulated in antiquity. The Gospel of Matthew and the Book of Acts were not part of the same volume. They were written by different authors in different places and times, and circulated independently. The compilation of the New Testament into a single volume only occurred later, which explains why these accounts could coexist without an explicit attempt at harmonization. Judas Iscariot is one of the most mysterious characters in biblical history, and his death reflects that complexity. The three versions we analyze today, Matthew, Acts, and Papias' account, offer a view of Judas that is both tragic, grotesque, and deeply symbolic. Whether as a repentant traitor, a punished figure, or someone cursed until their last breath, Judas remains a mystery. The field of blood is the element that unites these versions, but its meaning varies. In Matthew, it is the price of betrayal. In Acts, it is the place stained by Judas's blood. For Papias, it is the cursed ground, uninhabitable because of the foulness of his death. What is the truth? Perhaps we will never know, but what is clear is that Judas represents human frailty, guilt, and the inevitable consequence of choices. So, can we understand Judas without confronting these contradictions? Was he merely a traitor, or also a victim of fate, an instrument of a greater divine plan? The figure of Judas reminds us that truth is often fragmented, and it is through different versions that we understand a bit more of the complexity. If you liked what you saw here and want to support us to continue bringing more information and reflection, subscribe to the channel now. Your subscription makes all the difference and motivates us to continue. I count on you. Leave your opinion in the comments.